Hey y'all, Matt here, and today we're talking about a story in the Bible which shows us why sometimes it's good that the Lord actually doesn't tell us His whole plan for us in advance. Today we're going to be in Genesis chapter 12 with the story of Abraham and Sarah. And what we see here in Genesis 12, God actually comes to Abraham and He promises him that He's going to bless him. He calls him out and He says, I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to make your line great. I'm going to make you into this great nation, and through that nation the rest of the world is going to be blessed. But there was a problem with this promise that God made with him in the eyes of Abraham, and that's because him and his wife weren't able to have any kids. His wife Sarah was barren. And at this time Abraham was probably about 75 years old. So he's obviously getting past childbearing age, and so there's a lot of problems here and a lot of reason for Abraham to doubt and to have issues with what God says. But Abraham is obedient, he trusts God, and he does what God tells him to do. He leaves the nation, starts this journey, and he's basically left to see what happens in faith. In Genesis 15, 3 chapters later, we see this is where God actually approaches Abraham and He makes the legally binding covenant with Abraham. God walks through some dead animals and basically says, if this promise that I've made to you doesn't happen, may this be done to me. May I die like these animals have. And so once again, this thing comes up in Abraham's head. You know, how can God possibly do this when I'm too old to have children, or getting too old to have children, and I still don't have a son? You know, I have to have a son to have an heir and to have a lineage that's going to continue. And this is where I believe that it would have been better off if Abraham didn't know that entire plan. Obviously, God revealed what He knew He should to Abraham. He had to reveal it to him in order to make that promise to him. But knowing myself, if I had gotten a promise like this from God, I would do the same thing that Abraham did. And instead of being patient and waiting on God, they got impatient and they thought time was running out because they're older. And so they go about trying to find ways to solve this problem of no heir on their own. And I can't say that I wouldn't do the same thing. I know when I get frustrated thinking that God's not moving fast enough and stuff, that if I knew the plan, I would try to start finding ways to force it, to try to make it happen even when it's not meant to be yet. But in Genesis 16, one chapter later after this covenant is made, we see that instead of waiting on God and His timing to make this promise that He's kept with Abraham, Abraham and Sarah did something that we kind of interpret as weird, but that was very, very much common practice in this time. And Sarah gave her Egyptian slave Hagar to her son, basically to be a surrogate mother. And this was a common practice during this time. This isn't as weird as it sounds for our culture, but he basically goes and he sleeps with the slave and he impregnates her, and they have a son, and this son's name is Ishmael. As the story progresses in Genesis 17, Ishmael is 14 years old, and God again approaches Abraham and He says that He's going to have a son, and it's going to be this son through which the promise that He's made continues. And Abraham and Sarah actually laugh at him at this point because they've been waiting for years for this son that God has promised, and it's still not happened. Abraham's 100 years old at this point. Sarah's 90 years old. It would be physically impossible for them to have a son without some kind of miracle from the Lord. And that may have been what the Lord was waiting on, when what we think is possible was exhausted so He could step in and do the impossible. So in Genesis chapter 21, we actually see the Lord came to Sarah as He had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what He had promised. He kept this promise on His time. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, and at the appointed time that God had told him. And so what we see is this new baby. His name, of course, is Isaac. This is the promised son that God had been promising this entire time. And this is the baby through which God would keep that promise and through which the bloodline of Jesus would continue. His descendants would eventually basically be the start of the nation of Israel, and God would use this nation basically to continue his plan of reconciling sinful humanity to him. And but the thing about this is, because Abraham and Sarah weren't patient, and because they forced things, because they tried to forge their own way, and they didn't wait on God's plan to come to fruition, they actually caused a lot of complications, and a lot of people don't know this. A lot of people would say, well, Ishmael is still a blessing to them, even though, they went around God's plan to have him. But if you're not familiar, Ishmael is actually a prophet and a messenger, and a big part of the beginning of the faith of Islam. And so Islam has basically been birthed out of what Abraham and Sarah actually did as a way to try to circumvent just waiting on the Lord to keep his promise. And so this is something that I actually stumbled on one time when I got discouraged waiting on God to show me what I was praying for, to show me that whole plan and to reveal his whole plan. And this really it kind of almost like was a slap in the face, like, hey, like, this is a great example of two people that had God's entire plan, and because they had all these future steps, they jumped ahead of the Lord and they weren't patient. It would have almost been better off if they didn't know the whole plan and they were forced to wait on the Lord. But this is a great example, something to keep in mind if you're waiting on the Lord and you're trying to figure out what the next step he has for you. Be patient in that. Continue to do the last thing that he told you to do. Be obedient, but don't try to force things. We should obviously work as hard and as aggressively as we can on what he's told us to, but doing things like this, they're not beneficial. We have to wait on the Lord sometimes to reveal that next step of the plan. And if you're still waiting, it might be a good thing. It might be because you're not ready yet, or the circumstances don't allow it yet. So just lean into the Lord, pray over it, and continue to be obedient in the last thing that he's told you to do. But I hope this video was beneficial. I will see you on the next video. Until then, if you have any suggestions for topics that you would like to see, or you are local to the Greensboro area and would like a study Bible, please text me or email me, and I'd love to get one to you. But until the next video, I love y'all. Blessings.